Alright, everybody. This is going to be the final video for the Zipline networks. Here's going to be... I think this is where we use more actual Zipline stations than anywhere else in the game, but here's where they're all needed most, because the bulk of this is going to be the snowy Rocky Mountains, which are just pure hell to traverse on foot. So here's where we really need the Ziplines. Well timed, Sam. As usual, first thing we want to do is just go through and prune a bit. I did have some sad realizations. Since I made the last video, I went back and recovered all of the memory chips, which required, quite a bit of backtracking, as you do. And that's when I found that as timefall deteriorates them, it doesn't just rust them out and make them unusual, but it actually removes them from the map. So when I went to the eastern region, I expected to have to run around a bit and dump some chiral crystals to restore them. What I didn't expect was to have my bandwidth all open again and have to go replot the points where I had put them in the first place. Fortunately, I remembered pretty clearly, and the ones I didn't, I had a video to reference, so that was handy. So we are starting this Rocky Mountain leg of things at Mountain Knot City. Whereas we aimed for a figure 8 pattern over here east of the Rockies, here it's still gonna be a figure 8, but rather than right angles and connections, it's basically gonna be a northern loop and a southern loop. So more circular, less rectangular, but still in a general figure 8 for ease of transport and overall connectivity. We're starting at Mountain Knot because it is sort of the central hub of where all that's going to be working. So just to give a brief rundown, okay? That goes over to the doctor, that one that's blocked right there, that is right in front of the doctor. That's going to head up toward Hartman's lab. That connects over to weather station, which we're going to be coming back this way in a little bit, but just for reference, up there is a peak right above the weather station, which we will see again in a minute. Note those burned out buildings and this view overlooking Mountain City right down. That'll be our reference point for when we come back. And finally, off in the distance is going to be taking us clockwise along the northern loop. So from here, you want to stay off the roads. It won't let you build on those paths, which is handy. Because I've also found out in the very late game, especially when trying to build up your all of your porter grades, particularly your delivery time grade, roads are handy because you get orders that are too large to be carried on your back, so you can't use the zip lines, you have to get a truck. Which is fun in the late game, remembering, right, here are all the ways we did this sort of thing, nearly 100 hours ago. So from here we get an overlook of the valley below, and this takes us off to the left here. The photographer is set up in this... Oh no, did it again. That's an online... This is why I like to prune as much as I can, because online nodes will take me off track and make me waste time on deliveries. And I like to keep the network completely self-contained. But the photographer, anyway, back to her, she has her set up in this little canyon. So I shoot off to the left here, set up at the top so that I can take my shot down the pass, which gets me on the far outside of this valley that we have to the north here. Passing over the photographer's compound. And then we have our connection to the north for the novelist's son. One of the more useful preppers to do some side deliveries to, if at all possible while traveling in this area. I'd recommend, if you can spare the weight, grab an order or two for the novelist's son every time you're passing around, because his gift that he gives you is the D cryptobiotes. The D stands for dream, according to one of his emails. They are a single cryptobiote that fills your health entirely. They are very handy, and you can keep up to 999 of them, I believe, as you can with the normal cryptobiotes, but they are much more effective. There's the novelist's son's hut. Nothing too fancy about the placements here. Wide, flat plains. You could probably go in more straight lines if you wanted. I found that I wanted to stick around the outside, partly because I like the idea of keeping the circle. It just makes the shape of the network stick better in my head, and partly because there are some mule and terrorist encampments in this valley. Not really an issue if you're zipping past them, but you might as well keep them on the interior, out of range as much as possible. Another little foothill on the side. Always good to give yourself as much height as possible, but we've learned that by now. Here's where the interesting stuff will begin. To the left, we have the way station. North of Mountain Knot. I believe this is the way station north of Mountain Knot City, but regardless, there it is. Gonna go past that. So here we want to shoot as close as we can to the foot of the mountain. And this was another one of those instances where I worked the two outsides of the problem and then fit the central one in between them. Because we're doing the same thing that we did way back at the wind farm in the eastern region, where we're going to be shooting up through these trees and kind of blind. So you can see the connections being made, but when you're setting this up, you really don't have as much of an idea of what of these trees is passable and what is not. Now, up here, things get slightly complicated. Partly because we have a couple of branching paths, and partly because this area likes to white out. More than once, I've come up here and had to navigate in an area I couldn't see. But fortunately, the trick we have for that, if you go to the map, this only works when you're stationary, sitting inside a zipline. It won't work as you're traveling from one to the next. The current connection, you can see I'm connected to that zipline off to the right there, the online one that's not mine, will flash and strobe like that. So if you're in whiteout conditions, that is a good way, albeit slower, having to pause at every stop to be able to determine which direction you're facing. And even though you have a compass ring, it can be difficult to read, especially against all this white, especially in those stormy conditions. So, moving up the mountain as we go. Here we have another triangle situation where if I go to the left, I can go straight on to the next step in the network, but if I go to the right, that gets me over to the Mountaineer's shelter. And again, I try to set it up as a triangle so that I can approach from either direction and go either directly or drop off cargo at the Mountaineer, and then from there continue off in the direction I was going originally. Keeps everything more fluid, prevents having to backtrack, because instead of having to go back to the zip line I was at down there in order to hit this one, I just like the versatility and try to keep it as streamlined as I can. Granted, the triangles are a compromise for not being able to hit shelters at those clean 350-foot intervals, but such is life. In the world of Death Stranding, there are much larger problems to deal with. Now, from this peak, we have a couple of choices. Up this way, that leads to the first prepper. That's right above the first prepper, that one way off on the hill at the 350-meter mark, and then back down south around that northern loop. Over here leads to the Spiritualist's hut, and over here leads off to the distribution center. Now, the Spiritualist's hut is set up in such a way, again, similar to the triangles. This is more of a T, but such a way that once you come here, say you have to deliver to the Spiritualist, you can then go off to the southern loop. That one where it's detected is in front of the first prepper's house, hovel, shelter, what have you. That is just the connector along the way, or you can take it off to the left, north to the distribution center. This is going to be a straight line from here. Well, a straight path. It's a curved line, but there are no deviations in this direction, except for ones created by other players, of course. This is a very tight shot, a very steep angle down the side of the mountain, and it creates a bit of extra distance, but I couldn't find another way to get over the slope. In the snowy mountains, there are very long, slow, rolling ridges that you tend to have to speed up some efficiency just because that curvature blocks your sight line as you go along. And that is unfortunate. It requires you to use more zipline nodes than you would have to in straight lines. But I have spent a lot of time working on them, and this was the best solution I could find. Can't say it's perfect, obviously. If it were perfect, I'd be able to make the full connections that I wanted to do. For instance, coming up, I tried to do, there's the way station north of Mountain Nut. Up here, I have a clear shot down into that valley. You'll see it hits the ruined village, or the ruined shelter rather, and there is a manufacturing plant here, and then this is the craftsman's hut. And I wanted to create this connection to make a nice straight line all the way across from here to Lake Knot, but I just couldn't find a way to do it cleanly. It would have taken an extra, it would have taken four zipline hops instead of 3, and I just couldn't find a way to do it nice. Plus, I didn't have the bandwidth to spare for any of them at the end, so I never managed to come back and do it. That's one of the things, if I could possibly tidy up and clean up some of the others, have the bandwidth to spare, maybe come back and do that someday. Did not mean to hit that button, that was a mistake, but so it goes. So there is a connection. This doesn't also connect down here the way I'd like it to, but that's that is fine. This distribution center, I ended up maxing out fairly early on and never really had to come back. So there is a central connection from the Rockies over to the eastern side, which we mentioned in the last video, if you recall. It's at the weather station. And then there is a lower connection going from the Veteran Porter down to the Timefall farm, and I'll show those off once we get there. But in the meantime, going back up to the Spiritualist and continuing down the southern continuing south down the loop. That's not mine. Sometimes it works out that you can, if you get sidetracked, you can carry on. But this one, as you can see, does hit the distribution center. Now, especially in the mountain regions, it's important to note dismounting the zip lines is something you actually have control over. Because a lot of your zip lines will be on very narrow ledges in very high precipitous places, especially around some of the preppers. If you dismount them in the wrong direction, you'll be dumped off the side of a cliff. But you can control one of the things that the game doesn't necessarily tell you about, but you can control where you get off the zip line from. It will always bend over and deposit you in the direction the camera is facing. So the Spiritualist is a good example because we're right on the cliff. If I were to go this way, if I were to hit the button right now, it would bend forward from the camera's perspective and dump me over that cliff and onto the bridge below. If I were to go this way, it'll dump me off right in front of the car. Now the camera will swing around to get a reverse shot of you being dropped off the zip line every time. Don't panic, it's just the camera. The zip line is going to always dump you off in wherever the direction the camera was facing when you push the button. The reverse shot is just cinematic. It's not actually going to affect anything practical. Now this is going to continue down south and bring us back to Mountain Knot City. High peaks are always good, especially up here. You want to try to get the highest vantage point you can get because these mountains are a pain. Another triangle, by the way. This is going to carry on south. This is the prepper. Another precipitous ledge. You want to make sure every time you get off you are facing the right direction. The blue connection lines can be sometimes difficult to see on against the white background of the snow, but you see how the distance tag there, when it's not connected right now, it's smaller and less highlighted. But when you do connect to it, the tag pops up a bit and the blue fills out on the inside. That is due to the newest update, 1.07, I want to say, whatever that number is, which increased text size. And this is one of the things where the size increase was most useful, at least for me. It probably highlighted and bumped up the tag a little bit previously, but now it makes it a lot easier to tell. Because before, reading some of this was rough. Some of it still is, I'm not gonna lie, but it's definitely better now. Alright, so a bit of a junction point. So we're gonna have to go a couple of directions to show off. I made sure, if you listen, to set this particular zipline, the one I'm on right now, to Khalid and Major Laser's trigger, I did that because this is by far and away my personal favorite song in the soundtrack, and I wanted to make sure that point in particular was very distinct, because this is the key junction point on this northern loop. So when I hear trigger, I know that I'm hitting that spot and have to actually decide the direction I'm going. It doesn't have to be that song. Obviously, it can be any tell you want, or you can find some other way to distinguish, but I just personally really love Trigger. The soundtrack is pretty phenomenal. Maybe now that I've platinumed the game, or am about to, I have one last trophy to get, which I'll do as soon as I've wrapped up this video. But you see, this is that down shot over Mountain Knot City, and those are those burned out buildings from before. So this is the connection we were at, and this will take you down to Mountain Knot if you want to go west. And then if you get back to what I call the trigger spot, the Khalid spot. Trigger spot is probably not the best nomenclature. You can take it back east, and with a connection spot on that side of the mountain, will take you down to the weather station, connecting both halves of the map. There's that music. Yeah, now that I am within a hair's breadth of platinuming the game, I might come back later after I let it live under my skin for a little while. Come back, do some analysis, some more artistic type work, because this game is it is phenomenal. It is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I've been a consumer of Kojima's work for a long time, an appreciator, if you will, and it definitely emphasizes the weather station. There's the weather station. Some of his bad habits are very, very much on display in this game, and that is not to denigrate the rest of the work, but I would be disingenuous if I claimed to not see them. Especially when everything Kojima does is so very, if not it's very visible. Maybe not necessarily transparent. He definitely likes his layers and his metaphor and his coded messages, but visible in the sense that it is very obvious, it is very big. He doesn't take half measures, which, for better or worse, is why his work is always so effective to me. Now, this side point can also get over to the downward connection there. There's no real convenient reason other than it just makes an easier step if you're coming from the north or the south and trying to get to Mountain Knot. That I don't think is mine. This now will take you down either to the Roboticist in the valley below, or further south along the network. It's a triangle, but it is a vertical triangle. It is played along the z-axis, but works just the same. Somewhat trickier with the angles, if you asked me, but not impossible. Now, Hartman's lab is down on the right, and honestly, something I didn't... Nope, way too far. Never mind. I hadn't bothered to see if this connection worked because I was working more along that loop. Not so much thinking about connecting it from side to side. And now that is much too far to reach. So here, another high peak, ideally suited for vantage. That takes us down to the geologist. That takes us down to the veteran porter. Connecting the whole way, we're going to head left to the veteran porter really quick, and then we'll come up and show that connection in progress on the way back. Down the side, I really do love zipping down the sides of the mountains. Down more so than up, I suppose, but they're both impressive. If only knowing how much of a pain it was trudging up the side the first time, and realizing that I've gone through the effort of setting this up, and now something that took me 45 minutes to an hour is over in 30 seconds. That's a very satisfying feeling. This goes down to the veteran porter. This little notch you see cut out of the cliffside in front of me is where you're going to want to try to shoot down into the valley, because once you're over that gets you down to the Timefall farm. And in the last video I made a mention of taking the silos off in the distance there into account. That is why you want to be able to connect this shot around the side of the silos. Now, something I found, and if you're going for the platinum, you're going to need to do this anyway, because that peak off in the distance there, the one that kind of looks like Pride Rock from The Lion King, there is a memory chip up there, but there is also a large collection of chiral crystals up there, that one there. Not as many as you get from defeating any of the bosses, but significantly more than you'll find just running around or killing a handful of BTs. And the area is set up with some special significance. A song will start playing once you get there, much like how some of the soundtrack was triggered earlier in the game during specific moments in the overworld of your first approach to Port Knot City, for example. So that took me by surprise. It was nice to have something like that happen at this very late endgame stage. Similarly, Diction. There is down. It's in the eastern region. I didn't know about it when I made that video. I just found it earlier today. But over. I'll actually wait until we hit this junction point so I can pull up the map and at least give some amount of visual. It is over here by the film director. If you remember, or you go back and look at my video about Zipline's 201 in the eastern region, this triangle here by the film director, just north of it is a foothill. And a zip line I had marked off there. Just to the east of that foothill is another spot with a memory chip, but it has a ton of cryptobiote nests. About 6 smaller ones and 1 giant pillar, which to me indicates that this is somewhere where a major breach must have taken place between the land of the living and the land of the dead, if that is where cryptobiotes come from. So that might be some places like this where the game is, the geography of the game is marked with like special significance, might bear some investigating. Perhaps down the line. Now this is the geologists. You're going to want to remember about how turning the camera affects where you dismount. Some of these rockier portions can cause you to stumble. I suppose I could have put it in a different place, but this was the one that made connecting a little easier down the road, and plus some of the towers and the slope of things is just, there's a lot to work around up here, so sometimes I don't even remember what the compromises were I had to make. I just did it enough that I found a spot that worked good enough for me. And moving along down the southern loop. It takes a bit of the wind out of my sails, knowing that eventually the timefall will not only turn all of these structures to rust, but just erase them entirely. But I suppose that does lend itself to the ephemeral nature of things. Throughout the game, you're taught to not get attached to physical objects or possessions. They even mention in some of the supplementary documents that there is no scarcity anymore, really. Now, interrupt that thought for a second. This is the paleontologist at the top of this hill. Something you're going to want to note: if you have a lot of gear here, you're going to want to dismount on the upside of the zipline. I'll dismount on the south just to show you why that is. It doesn't quite root the ground, and that small drop, if done at the wrong angle, can send you tumbling down the hill. And there's nothing worse than damaging your goods this close to a destination. But there's the paleontologist there. Going to continue further on west now. But yeah, the game does teach you from an early stage to not try to keep physical objects. Everything deteriorates, everything breaks. Even the vehicles, as you get them, they will break in time. They will run out of battery in the middle of nowhere in an unrecoverable location. It will just be gone. And that's part of how it works. That's just life in the UCA. And the structures are no different than anything else. They will be erased, which I didn't know necessarily at first, and so all of the satisfaction of building up the networks, it led to a feeling of this was my way of reconnecting America. This was how Raqus left his mark. Sam reconnected the chiral network. Amelia and Bridget, rebuilt the UCA, and Raqus built the Ziplines. But like all things, they turned into dust. Sentimentality. Here's the Evo Devo biologist. She's not very sentimental. Maybe I was just unlucky with the deliveries, but she always seemed upset to see me. Now, this was where we came from, off toward the paleontologist. That is heading back north, up to Hartman's lab. It will connect up here as well, keeping those nice, efficient, semi-efficient triangles. Now, here, one of the things you're going to note is that the map would have you going at a more direct route, a more northeasterly route to get to Hartman. You're going to be served a lot better by going off to the side, because this cluster of mountains here is very tall, You can see it off in the distance there, actually. That's it. It's very difficult to get around, and the foothill that goes off of it covers a wide area, and I spent a lot of time trying to find ideal placements over in that direction, and then eventually I just said, fuck it, and went off this way, and found a lot of BTs, and got drenched in a lot of mud, and then found a way that worked. So on this this small ridge, straight shot to the cliff. Going to be overlooking the Heart Lake up here. Well, if you can see it through the fog, but down below, Hartman's lab down there, off in the distance there. There we are. So the 195 down in that direction, and then 262 over there. Again, your numbers are going to be different. You're not going to have exactly the same placements as me, most likely, but just for purposes of identifying in this video. Down to Hartman's lab, the property line covers quite a bit, but as long as you can get a clean shot to those stairs, you'll be fine. Your balance will come back once you get onto the staircase, and it takes you straight up. Those glass doors beneath me, those are the entrance to the lab itself. Up here on this ridge, and we are back at the beginning of the loop. Down over here, just to the left of this little square building, is going to take us to a couple of directions for our last spot. That is Mountain Knot City, off to the right there. That is a junction that is necessary to get to this. Down here, we reach the Doctor. The last prepper on our list. Now the Doctor can't go straight to Mountain Knot, unfortunately, and I had 500 bandwidth. I had one zipline's worth of bandwidth to spare. This was the last point I laid. So, knowing that that wouldn't be enough to shore up any of those other connections I wanted to put in at the beginning, I instead brought it here onto this narrow peak that will take you back down south toward the Photographer where we started, and that'll take you to Mountain Knot, up to the lab and the Doctor. And that brings the zip lines to a close. If you have any specific questions, feel free to leave a comment or send me a message. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, and all that. And that way, if I get around in the future to doing any sort of artistic analysis on this game, you'll be the first to know. You can also keep up on some of my other projects. Just finished up a stream for Phantasmagoria over the last few weeks. Going to be doing Phantasmagoria 2 in the new year, and going to bring in some other collaborators, some other things that I'm excited to get off the ground. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for partaking in this this beautiful piece of work that is Death Stranding, and I will be waiting for you all on the beach.